All right. So I'm going to be talking about something I saw in the news about a month ago, and I didn't do a presentation on it at the time because I didn't really read too much into it. And then I saw an update to it the other week, ended up reading into it, and I was like, this is actually quite interesting. So let's take a look at Greensill Capital. So Greensill Capital was founded by Alexander David Lex Greensill. Now, when I did this run through with Chris, I said, I'm not sure exactly why he's called Lex. And after the presentation, he pointed out that it's literally under the bit of the name that it's drawn from. So it's Lex is short for Alexander. That was a good one from me. And he was the son of some melon and sugarcane farmers from Australia. And everyone expected him to go into the family business. But that changed in 2001 when he came to Britain, and he ended up founding a business that landed him over £1 billion net worth. So how did he go from being the son of some poor Australian farmers to a billionaire in Britain? Well, let's start with this idea. If I go to the shop and I want to drink beer, which if any of you know me, which I know Seb at least knows me quite well, I love my beer. I can go into Sainsbury's and give them my money in exchange for their goods and go and get drunk somewhere. If I try to do anything funny, like suggest that they give me their beer and I'll pay them money in the future, I would likely be explaining my actions to the police in short order. But that sort of model doesn't happen the same with businesses necessarily. So let's say a big business wants to buy beer to sell on from a supplier. They don't immediately give the money. Instead, they take the beer and they give an invoice, a sort of short-term debt. That allows the business to go on, sell the beer on to whoever they want to, and then come back and pay the money, collecting their debt in the process. Now, that delay is great for the buyers of the supplies because it allows them to use the supplies to create money, whether that's by just selling it on, if as a retailer would, or by producing it into something more manufactured, like a watchmaker would take iron and turn it into a watch. But it's not so great for the suppliers because throughout the process, they're sitting without either goods or money. So there's a solution to this in finance, and it's known as supply chain financing. And it looks something like this. So we're not at all going to even look at this because it's boring as hell. We're going to just take a look at an example and figure it out from there. So let's say that same business and that same farmer, supplier, whatever you want to call it, want to do business, but they don't want to have this same problem. The business wants to have that same delay, but the supplier wants his money immediately. Well, what they do is enter an agreement with the middleman, in this case, Lex Greensill. And the agreement goes like this. The supplier has sugar, the business wants to buy it. The supplier gives his sugar to the business and gets that same short-term debt, the invoice. Now, he wants his money immediately. So what he does is he goes to Greensill and he says, let's trade. Greensill gives him a little bit less money than he's owed from the business, but the upside for the small supplier is that he gets the money immediately. Greensill now is owed the money by the business. And eventually, as they always do, the business pays up. They collect their debt back from Greensill, and he keeps the extra money because the business pays full price. He keeps the extra as profit. Now, as I say, this is a very standard form of lending in finance called supply chain financing. And it's quite boring and traditional, and it's got very, very small profit margins. You can imagine that the supplier doesn't want to lose much of his profit, and the business doesn't want to pay any extra. But Greensill figured out a way to make this incredibly lucrative, enough that it made him a billionaire. So what did exactly he do? He took various different debts or invoices from these companies and bundled them up into through a process known as asset securitization. Very boring term, I know, but stay with me here. And then sold it through a place like Credit Suisse as an investment fund. That meant that they could get money from investors for these short-term debts whilst waiting on payment from the companies. It also allowed Greensill to push the risk around to various different people, whether it was institutional investors or insurance companies or whatever you might be, other investment banks even. And this was an incredible genius stroke from him that made him huge amounts of money. And at the height of the company's wealth, the various investment funds managed under Greensill Capital were worth $10 billion. Now, this process is very much the same as what happened in the process that led up to 2008 housing crash, where various different assets, in that case mortgage bonds, were bundled together and sold as a diversified investment. And some of the same problems that arose then were seen in this same situation here. So let's first of all talk about the various problems here. With supply chain financing, as I've said, it's a very traditional and long-standing form of lending, but it does have some drawbacks, particularly from the view of investors. And those drawbacks are that it allows companies to hide long-term debt on their balance sheets as a different form of a different item on that balance sheet. So it can make the company look a lot healthier than it really is. So although it is allowed, and though it does allow businesses to transfer money smoothly and allow production to go smoother, it does mean that various regulatory bodies look into the process quite severely. For example, Coke, were questioned by the SEC after 1.1 billion appeared on their balance sheet that seemed to be linked to supply chain financing that they hadn't disclosed. So that's the risk of supply chain financing in particular. But let's think about what Lex was doing. Now, he was taking a bunch of assets, bundling them up and selling them on. That's fine if the underlying assets are sound. But what if they aren't? What if the exact same thing that happened in 2008 were to happen here? And if you're paying attention, you're probably going to see where this is going. The same thing happened here. So let's run through the situation as of this year. Greensill Capital was funding a man named Sanjeev Gupta. Now, Sanjeev Gupta has been going around buying up almost derelict steel mills and turning himself into a steel tycoon. It's been working quite well for him, but it is arguably a very risky business. He's buying things that are on the risk of collapse and trying to save them. Greensill has been financing them. Greensill is insured by primarily Tokyo Marine Insurance Group. There's other people involved, but they're the big player. Credit Suisse is selling those funds that are being managed by Greensill, and those funds are backed by, among other things, assets from Sanjeev Gupta. Now, Tokyo Marine Insurance Group, they're insuring these things, so they start to do some investigation, and they find that at this point, 5 billion out of the $10 billion worth of investment funds are linked to Sanjeev Gupta and his incredibly risky business. They're not happy about this, and they do further investigation and find that, in fact, 90% of the revenue of Greensill is linked to similarly risky businesses. So Tokyo Marine Insurance Group goes to Greensill and says, nah, we're not doing this. We're not insuring you anymore. Sorry. Credit Suisse hears about this and goes, hold on, why aren't you insuring them? And then goes and takes a look at Sanjeev Gupta, and they're like, oh, that's not good. Goes back to Greensill and says, we're not going to be selling your funds anymore. They're frozen. And we're going to try and return the money to investors. If this seems a bit convoluted, it should. It is a big mess. This is what happens when traditional finance becomes convoluted and complex in an attempt to squeeze more money out of it than necessary. Well, what's the aftermath of all this? Lex has greatly reduced in his wealth. To be fair, the family sold about $200 million in his company a couple of years ago, so he's not going to starve or anything, but he's no longer a billionaire. The $10 billion worth of funds have been frozen, $3 billion have been returned to customers, but the rest they're struggling to return, and that essentially means $7 billion has just disappeared. The executives and various people involved at the investment banks have either been fired or had their bonuses suspended, which I'm sure they're really going to struggle with. Gupta is scrounging for financing, and a lot of his steel mills are now on the edge of bankruptcy. So all of this ties back to what happens when we see things like the Bill Hwang and Archegos capital management incident, which also happened with Credit Suisse. This is indicative of the end of a big bull run where people are getting very loose in the markets, not paying attention to the things they should be paying attention to, not being careful about the things they're doing, and allowing individual people to play games without any regulatory oversight. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Hi there. Thank you so much for watching our video. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please let us know in the comment box, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you can learn more about our channel. Thank you very much, and see you next time.